Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance Network, and today I'm asking the question, is it time for the anarchists to build an army? Before we get into that though, I want to remind you guys to bookmark theconsciousresistance.com. This is our website. You can find all of our content, including those of you who are new to the idea of anarchism or what we promote here. I invite you to go to our About page, click to this Welcome to TCRN, and you can find more about us, including some introductory essays that explain our view on anarchism, which is essentially a spiritual anarchism, and what that really means. It's not chaos, it's not disorder, it's not violence like the mainstream media wants you to believe. So this video is a thought I've had for a while. It's basically been sparked by some research I've been doing. I'm working on a video on my Anarchist series. Some of you might have seen my Anarchist series. Let's just search Anarchist series right here and see if it pops up. It's a series of videos I've done on historical anarchists, libertarians, individualist anarchists. It's kind of mainly what I've stuck with. Dr. Gertrude B. Kelly. There's more of them in here. Josiah Warren and others that we've talked about on this channel as part of our Anarchist series. And so I'm working on another video on anarchist Nestor Makhno, who was a Ukrainian anarchist who fought in the Russian Civil War and is a very interesting character. I've been reading different books about him and his life and what he was involved in. And there's mainly one thing we're going to focus on today. This is not going to be a full exposition of his life. That'll be for a separate video. But we're going to key in on his history of militarism. Specifically, he was involved in the Russian Civil War and fighting against the commies and fighting against the nationalists. And he ended up creating his own army, his own anarchist army, and that's what we're going to talk about. And I've actually been, as I've been researching this, I've been writing about it for my new upcoming book, or the re-release of my first book, The Conscious Resistance: Reflections on Anarchy and Spirituality. And for those of you who've read the book, you might be familiar that at the end of the very end of the book, we discuss historical examples of people who've lived as stateless people or without a state, in some combination, or in anarchist societies, and what that could look like. And so we discuss Nestor Makhno, and I'm just going to read you guys a little bit of this from our book. This is, you're the first ones hearing this, so I hope you appreciate that. And it'll give you a little bit of the background, and then we'll get to my question and my thoughts on this. So from 1918 to 1921, there was an experiment in an anarchist society in Ukraine known as the Free Territory of Ukraine, or Makhnovia, after Ukrainian anarchist Nestor Makhno. This time was extremely chaotic in Russia and Ukraine as the Bolshevik communist government attempted to establish dominance in Russia and maintain a momentary peace with the Central Powers of World War I. In March 1918, the Bolsheviks ceded large territories to the Central Powers, including Ukraine, which was facing internal turmoil and an increasingly divided population. Some of Ukraine's present population defected to the Bolsheviks, some followed various forms of socialism, and still others waved the black flag of anarchism under the leadership of Nestor Makhno. Makhno has been described as a bandit, a criminal, a leader, a soldier, and a brilliant strategist. Some accounts of his early life describe him as a Robin Hood type character who is committing robberies to distribute money to the people. Eventually, Makhno was arrested and spent time in a Russian prison. Then in February 1917, when the first revolution in Russia broke out and the Tsar was overthrown, political prisoners were liberated from Moscow prisons. In October 2017, when the Bolsheviks launched their revolution and installed the dictatorship of the proletariat, a civil war broke out. Makhno and other prisoners were released at the time. And at the end of World War I, this is the kind of time period where in the end of World War I, Russia's divided between the communist Bolshevik Red Army and the Tsar loyalist nationalist White Army. As an anarchist, Makhno disagreed with the authoritarian practices of the Bolsheviks, specifically their targeting of anarchists. He also opposed the nationalist supporters of the Tsar. Additionally, he opposed foreign military occupation of Ukraine because you had Germany and Austria coming in there trying to take control. In response, Makhno organized a small group of supporters and launched guerrilla attacks against the German and Austrian troops occupying Ukraine. He also fought the Red and White armies, while on occasion he would partner with the commies out of necessity. His forces came to be known as the Black Army, or the Revolutionary Insurrectionist Army of Ukraine. Sometimes the Revolutionary Insurrectionist Anarchist Army of Ukraine, but clearly it was an anarchist army. Makhno started out with 15,000 armed troops and saw his numbers grow to nearly 100,000 soldiers who oversaw much of eastern Ukraine and a population of several million people. Makhnovist military strength reached its peak in late 1919. They had 83,000 infantry, 20,000 cavalry, 1,400 machine guns, 110 artillery guns, and on and on and on. Makhno was the primary strategist and planner of this army. His goal was to retake as many areas of Ukraine as he could from what he viewed as invading forces and threats to liberty for all Ukrainians. The army consisted of peasants, Jews, anarchists, and recruits from foreign nations. The Black Army even gained support from Red soldiers who had lost faith in the Bolsheviks after witnessing their utopian dream turn authoritarian. In November 1920, the Black Army temporarily aligned with the Bolshevik army to defeat the White Army forces. Immediately after, the Bolsheviks turned their focus on Makhno and the anarchists. Several of Makhno's associates were arrested and executed. Makhno managed to escape as the authoritarian Bolsheviks targeted anarchists around the country. Ultimately, though, in August 1921, Makhno and 70 of his men were wounded, and he barely escaped after an attack by the Red Army. And this was essentially the end of the Black Army, although there are reports that they were fighting in different areas as late as 1922. And so that goes into the history where we know basically the commies take over Russia and all that stuff, and the anarchists are exiled or killed or arrested. And what I write here then is Makhno's anarchist army was intended to be the defense force for the free territory of Ukraine. So again, in that chaos, in the middle of that civil war, the people start creating areas that are free from Bolsheviks, free from nationalists, free from foreign intervention, and they did so under the protection of the anarchist army. So their goal was never to conquer the land or the people, but return it to the people so they may freely organize without fear of tyrants or statists. When entering a town in which they just defeated the Red or White Army, they would post notices on the wall stating, "To all the workers of the city and its environs, workers, your city is for the present occupied by the revolutionary insurrectionist army. This army does not serve any political party, any power, any dictatorship. On contrary, it seeks to free from the region from all political power of all dictatorship. It strives to protect the freedom of action, the free life of the workers against all exploitation and domination." And the bulletins invited the people to attend a meeting where the Black Army would share their views in detail. They encouraged all the towns to respect freedom and organize without authority or exploitation. Now, of course, not everybody who lived in these areas that were called the Free Territory of Ukraine were anarchists per se, but they were being protected by this Black Army, which was made up, at least ideologically for the most part, of anarchists. The army was providing protection and the opportunity for the people to self-organize in the absence of monarchy or state communism. The army also protected the right to freedom of speech, free assembly, and political affiliation. They also repealed restrictions on press and political organizations. They even allowed the Bolsheviks, their enemies, to have freedom of press within that area. Of course, they didn't allow them to start propagating their message of taking over and things of that sort, but they still did allow them to put out their information. And even further, some of these communities organized in decentralized councils or Soviets and focused on rebuilding schools which had been abandoned during the war. They were offering free schools under the ideology of Francisco Ferrer, who was an anarchist educator, basically. Some of the communities adopted economic principles espoused by Kropotkin. And of course, I go into some of the criticisms of this effort. But the point here is that there have been efforts to try to create free territories, and this is again coming from the life of Nestor Makhno, who I'm working on a video on in the future on an anarchist series. And this is the Russian Civil War, 1917, 1920s. And for 3 years, they had what they called the Free Territory of Ukraine, and they were able to keep it going and keep it protected. And so my question is here, is it time for an anarchist army to protect ourselves? Because, people will often argue, in the absence of government, chaos is just going to take over. Or, I've had this guy trolling me recently for a week or so. Tell me what's going to happen when armed bandits come into your anarchist utopia. Well, for one, we're not trying to create a utopia. Utopia is not possible. At least I'm not. We're just trying to create a better world and reduce the amount of violence. But that doesn't mean that we're just assuming that, everything's going to work out perfectly. We don't need guns. We don't need to protect ourselves. Look, if you're going to build a community, anarchist or otherwise, you need to be able to protect yourself. Otherwise, you're just waiting for somebody to come take advantage of you. And if you're not the kind of person who's going to call the cops like me, then you need to learn how to defend and protect yourself. And what the insurrectionist army of Ukraine, the anarchist black army, was offering was basically, we'll come free you from the state. We'll have soldiers there, but the soldiers aren't going to interfere in politics. The soldiers aren't going to tell you how to live your life. The soldiers are basically just there as a protection force so that the people then have the freedom of mind and space and conscience to organize however they want. So I don't know. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on this, because I am becoming increasingly convinced that we need some type of army. I don't want to, I don't even know if I don't like the words army because of the association with the military and the state and all that. But clearly we can have defense forces, whatever you want to call them, that are separate from the state and its violence. And this is what Makhno is trying to do. Now, again, it wasn't always a perfect situation. This is not like an exaltation of what Makhno did per se. I'm just using him as an example. But what if, as we start to form these freedom cells and these decentralized communities in this better world that we know is possible, people do start to protect themselves and form community defense networks, and you could call that an army. But in the case of Makhno, they weren't content with like, hey, we have our own community defense force protection group that just stays in our community. They wanted to expand, so they kept taking more territories of Ukraine back from the Reds and the Whites. But again, not so they could dominate and take the women and all the food and things like that, but to come in and free the place and say, hey, you don't have to worry about the commies anymore. You don't have to worry about the nationalists. You're under the protection of the anarchist black army now. Now, please organize how you fit, but let's get rid of exploitation. Let's get rid of domination. Let's get rid of authoritarianism. And ultimately, you can't force your ideology, your philosophy on people, so you just create the space, the container for them to be free to organize how they will. And I think that's what he was aiming for. And I really I appreciate this, and this is such a lost part of history, even of anarchist history, that many of us don't know about. I didn't know about for the last couple of years. So I just want to hear your thoughts, anarchists out there, and those who aren't anarchists, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. Because, again, the common complaint is like, well, you guys are going to form an anarchist society, but without the state or without the cops, it's just going to take a bunch of roving, bandits to come take advantage of you. But what if we have an army to protect ourselves? What if this army can actually fight back? And as I write in the book as well, that when it comes to the Zapatistas in Chiapas in Mexico, or even Cherán and Michoacán, you have people who are organizing and have been able to kind of carve out their own autonomous zones where the federal government and the military basically just leave them alone, either because they think that it won't be worth the bloodbath or because they might be outgunned. I'm not sure which one exactly, but the point is that people can organize and can rally together to the point that the state will decide, you know what, let's just leave them alone. And that's kind of what I think we need to aim for, is we need to build something better and be able to protect ourselves. So, who's interested in building an anarchist army? Please let me know your thoughts, feelings, triggers, whatever, below in the comments. If you're new here, like, follow, subscribe, and go ahead to our website and search Anarchist series on the website or the YouTube channel or wherever you're following, and you should find other videos we've done on this if you are interested. Until next time, guys, thank you so much. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.